Few of them is the Law and Practice of the Tax Territories and Indian Perspective 2008 published by CCH, Master Guide to Income Tax Act 1901 to 2012 published by the Taxman, online database regarding the charitable institutions. He has given a charitable institutional referencer, the first online database on the charitable institutions. Second is the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act referencer database. With this brief introduction, I present before you Shri Rajesh ji. Rajesh ji.
Welcome, sir. I now welcome you to deliberate on your topic of charitable institutions. And last and final boarding call to all the members outside.
The professional members on the dais and ladies and gentlemen. It is still good morning. By the time I finish, it will be good afternoon. Mr. Mundra welcomed me to the city of Ahmedabad. I must say I have very fond memories. Although I am born and brought up in Mumbai, number of my relatives stay in Ahmedabad. Some of you would not remember, but I still remember the Gulab Jambus of Motumal Tanumal in 1970. So and have more. Yeah, I should say that. Yeah. Okay. So I'll deal with two topics. First, like a T20, first 35-40 minutes on recent amendments, and next 35-40 minutes on FCRA. And maybe last 5 minutes on Q&A. Charitable institutions per se is a very complex topic. You'll be surprised that there are 8 core sections and 80 amendments have taken place in last 54 years under the 1961 Act. And there is one provision which beats all, and that is amended it every time, and 18 amendments. 25 lakhs, then the proviso didn't apply. So the idea was that smaller charitable institutions, irrespective of whether they carry on business or not, they should qualify for exemption. Now what is the amendment? So there are two limbs. First limb, advancement, is identical with what it was earlier. The second limb, unless, so any activity in the nature of trade, commerce, etc. will not have now been substituted by one proviso and two limbs. First limb same as the previous one, the second limb is now changed. So first is, of course, it applies only to advancement of any other object of general public utility. As I mentioned, the first limb, the expression carrying on activity, is identical as the expression in the pre-amendment first proviso. But important thing, if you noticed it, it applies only if it is activity in the nature of trade, commerce or business. And this is a point of succor. Business, what is business? So it is not that every activity of a charitable institution can be construed as business. Fortunately, tribunals, most except one, in the pre-amendment scenario, have clearly stated that business presupposes profit motive. So it's not that merely because, so I'll give an example. Gandhiji's Sevagram Trust, it sells books propagating Gandhian philosophy. It makes money, little surplus out of it. So the question is whether it's business or not. And tribunal said no, it's not business. There is no profit motive in that. So you may make some incidental surplus, that's not prohibited. In fact, in the earlier case, before the amendment, Supreme Court itself had said that profit per se is not bad, but what is important is that the profit motive should not be there, so you make reasonable surplus out of the activity. So as long as a charitable institution in pursuit of its activity makes reasonable surplus, I would contend that it is not carrying on business, and if it is not carrying on business, the proviso shouldn't apply. This is secondly, activity to be undertaken in the course of actual carrying out. So what is actual? And courts have said it should be real, genuine, not fictional, collusive or illusory. So if the trust is actually carrying out the advancement object and the activity is undertaken in the course of such carrying out, then the first part of the second limb is satisfied, and the aggregate receipts from the specified activities should not be more than 20% of the total receipts. So here what is receipt? Receipt, I would submit, would include all receipts, be it corpus donation, be it any other receipt, normal donation, but all are receipts and they all should be reckoned for the purpose of calculating 20%. Now this is the heart of the controversy that would arise in future. What is the interpretation? I think the handout is with all of you. If you can read, unless and the exception to the proviso, will it apply unless both the conditions are fulfilled? So the activity of business undertaken, I'm sorry, I don't know, there must be some, but anyway, it's reproduced from the section itself. And I think this, to an extent, it is over here also. The activity of business, etc., undertaken in the course of actual carrying out. And the language says and the aggregate receipts should not be more than 20%. So what is the meaning of the word and? Typically one would mean and means cumulative. So both the conditions have to be satisfied. Your activity should be actual in the course of carrying out of the advancement object, and the receipts should not be more than 20%. But if you do this, what happens? First is, the intent of the memorandum is not satisfied. The memorandum explaining the provisions said clearly, the intent is to give relief to genuine charitable institutions and protect them from hardship under the first and second proviso to section 215, and to ensure appropriate balance, etc. But important thing is, the amendment has been brought about to give relief to genuine charitable institutions and protect them from the hardship. Second proviso dealt with the 25 lakhs limit. So the idea is that if a charitable institution has more than 25 lakhs receipt also, it should qualify. That is the idea. But if you interpret and as cumulative, what are the consequences? So the first consequence is that even charitable institutions with less than 25 lakhs receipt may not be covered. And that's the illustration which shows the sales may be 20 lakhs, but if other receipts are 79, then the percentage of business receipts is more than 20, and hence it will not satisfy the definition of charitable purpose. So instead of giving relief, it will cause hardship. The second consequence, even if an institution is solely engaged in a business, so there is a charitable institution helping the rural people, artisans in Kutch. They make products. They are being sold all over the country, especially in Gujarat and Mumbai. The sole activity is to help the rural people. They make products, no other activity. It may be construed as business, but it doesn't have other receipts. So mind well, even if a charitable institution is solely carrying on its genuine activity, it will still not qualify as a definition, under the definition. The third consequence, the higher the receipts, 4 times higher is the requirement of other receipts. So the same trust, if it had 1 crore receipts in year 1, it would need 4 crores plus as donations and other receipts in the same year. But suppose next year it did well and it increased the turnover to 2 crores, it would now need other receipts of more than 8 crores. So the better you did in your actual activity, the more other receipts one would need. Your exemption depends on not on your activity, but on how much is the quantum of other receipts. So it will affect many trusts. Memorandum said it affects those selling books, as I said again, Gandhian philosophy, Sevagram Trust, and many other. So all this would be affected if we interpret and as cumulative. So is there any solution? Fortunately, Supreme Court, like many other cases, has held in the past that and could be construed as or if the intent is not fulfilled, and extending that, Madras High Court said if it results and construed as cumulative results in absurd consequences, then also and should not be construed as and but should be construed as or. So I would submit that because of the consequences that we just saw, the interpretation of the proviso and the unless with and satisfying both the conditions does result in absurdity, does not satisfy the intent, and hence it should be construed as or. So how do you interpret it? To my mind, two types of charitable institutions are covered by the proviso. One is those who are carrying out genuine activity. They don't do anything, but only, or maybe they get donation receipts, etc. But those type of trusts which actually carry out such activity, they would satisfy. So the first limb is satisfied, they don't have to go to the second part. But there could be some trusts which are not satisfying the first limb. So their activity is not in the course of actual carrying out of advancement, yet they are charitable. So the second limb would apply to them. And the idea is that if such receipts don't form a substantial portion of their receipts, then let them enjoy exemption. So such trusts, if it is not more than 20% the business receipts, then they should get exemption. So I have informally discussed with a leading counsel of Bombay, and he concurred with this view. My sense is that this will lead to tremendous litigation, and maybe the institute could take the lead in putting forth its point to the Revenue Department. The next one is cancellation of registration. As you are aware, Section 13 deals with certain situations where if the trustees get the benefit, if there are transactions with the trustees, etc., then the trust will not get benefit of Section 11 and 12. In the past, department tried to cancel the registration once there was a violation of Section 13. Fortunately, for the institutions, the courts consistently said that that is not a ground for cancellation. Cancellation has only two grounds under 12AA3, which is if the activities are not genuine or if the activities are not in accordance with the objects of the institution. But barring these two circumstances, registration cannot be cancelled. So what is the amendment? The amendment now says that upon violation of Section 13(1), registration is liable to be cancelled. And the impact of cancellation of registration is that that institution will no longer get the benefit of exemption under Section 11. So if I paraphrase the subsection, it should be a trust which is granted registration. After the registration, it is noticed that Section 13(1) applies to it. The activities are being carried out in a manner that Section 11 and 12 do not apply on account of operation of Section 13(1). The charitable institution cannot prove that there was reasonable cause for the activities to be carried out in such manner. So there is no reasonable cause. If all the three conditions are satisfied, then the commissioner may cancel the registration. Such cancellation shall be by an order, and the order shall be in writing. So the first point is, the way the language is, it is independent of assessment. Even prior to assessment, if the commissioner notices this, he can cancel the registration. But the provision is penal in nature, so it has to be construed strictly, and if there are two views possible, the benefit must go to the SSE. This is important. Does a default under 13 automatically lead to cancellation of registration? And I would feel no. There are three reasons. One is, the principal commissioner may cancel and not shall cancel. May means discretionary. It leaves him some flexibility and leeway not to cancel the registration in certain circumstances. And you compare the language of 12AA4 in May with 12AA3, which is cancellation of registration in other circumstances. There the commissioner shall cancel if the preconditions are satisfied. So this clearly shows that it is not that in every situation the registration ought to be cancelled. The third is, if there is a reasonable cause, mere default in 13(1) will not trigger cancellation. If there is a reasonable cause for such violation, then again registration cannot be cancelled. And the last is cancellation only if activities are being carried out in a specified manner. So what is the meaning of activities? Is it singular or plural? Being carried out, does it mean continuous carrying out or one stray incident? All these factors will come into picture, and unless they are satisfied, in my view, registration cannot be cancelled. What is reasonable cause? And there have been a number of judgments on what constitutes reasonable cause in different contexts. I have culled out a few. So, ignorance of law. Against our popular misconception that ignorance of law is not excuse, courts have held that ignorance of law may constitute a reasonable cause. So if one is not aware, genuinely not aware of section 13, a particular nuance of section 13, then merely because 13 is attracted, it could plead that it is ignorant of the similar provision. Bona fide belief. A subset of ignorance of law is bona fide belief. So again, if there is a mistaken bona fide belief that section 13(1) is not violated, it will constitute reasonable cause, and umpteen decisions on that. The intent is to cover deliberately committing violation, and that's what the memorandum says. So unless there is a deliberate committing of violation, section 13(1), registration should not be cancelled. And the last is expert opinion. Again, this is a subset of bona fide belief. If you get an expert opinion, genuine, who clearly and unequivocally states that section 13 is not applicable to you on your facts, and if you rely on that, and subsequently it is held that no, that particular opinion is wrong, even if it is wrong on merits, registration cannot be cancelled because you have relied genuinely on an expert opinion. Order, just two more points. cancellation, can it be with retrospective effect? So if the commissioner finds some violation for the period prior to 1st October 2014, can it go back today? I would feel no, because the law itself came on 1st October 2014. If a particular action was in accordance with law on the date on which it was committed, then by a subsequent amendment in law, it cannot become illegal. And Mumbai Cricket Association, by some observations to this effect, that registration cannot be cancelled with retrospective effect prior to the insertion. And on cancellation, this is again important. Let's say an institution violates 13(1) in year 1. In year 2, it notices and it makes good the default. It's no longer violated. Even if the registration is cancelled, I would feel it can resubmit an application for registration, because there is no cooling off period between cancellation and fresh submission of application. It can still make an application, satisfy the commissioner that it is satisfying all the conditions required for registration, and it ought to be granted registration. And this is impact. So if on merits, like any other quantum penalty and quantum assessment, if on merits you succeed before the tribunal that 13(1) is not applicable, then automatically the cancellation of registration also falls flat. These are other implications. 80G, the institution may lose approval under 80G, but exemption under section 10, if it's got some income under section 10, that would be available. We now go to the next amendment, double deduction of depreciation. The law prior to the amendment, courts had consistently held that for a charitable institution, unlike others, the full cost of acquisition of asset was available as a deduction as application of income under section 11. So if the income is 1 lakh and if it spends 50,000 on acquisition of some fixed asset, its income, taxable income, would be 50,000 and not 1 lakh. And most, I would not say all, but most courts had said, in spite of getting depreciation in the first year, it would continue to get, in spite of getting the full cost of acquisition as a deduction in the first year, it will continue to get depreciation on the same asset, because that comes under general principles. Income has to be computed in a commercial manner. In a commercial manner, if you compute income, depreciation has to be allowed. So what is the amendment? If cost of acquisition has been claimed as a deduction, as application of income, then you can't get deduction by way of depreciation in computing income in subsequent years. So you can't get double deduction. In essence, that's the amendment. Now what are the consequences? One is, of course, the income in subsequent years will increase to that extent, to the extent of depreciation. The language suggests embargo on deduction while computing income. There are two phases, computation of income and application of income, which is a deduction. That is not clear whether it can still be allowed as application of income. But there are other benefits or other points to mitigate the damage. That income, the notional income, could also be applied to other charitable purpose. And if you apply it to charitable purpose, obviously then your taxable income will reduce to that extent. You get 15% basic exemption on that. So if your income, let's say depreciation is 1 lakh rupees, you can spend 1 lakh rupees on other purposes because it's cash available with you, or you may spend 85,000 and 15% basic exemption will still come to you. You may opt for application in the subsequent year under the explanation. So again, taking example 1 lakh, if you spend 40,000 in year 1, in the year of depreciation, you can spend 60,000 in year 2. And the last is, you could even accumulate it for 5 years, provided you satisfy the conditions. So you get all these mitigating factors against the depreciation. A similar amendment has been made for exemption under section 10. Courts had consistently said that exemption under section 10 is available to a charitable institution, although its income is exempt under section 11. So if an institution had some shares, or if it had units, and it got exemption under section 10, then that is exempt totally. It doesn't come under the purview of section 11, and the balance income can get relief under section 11. That's what the court said. Now the amendment provides that you can't get such exemption under section 10 except agricultural income and exemption under section 10 into bracket 23C. So the trust can either get under 11 or under, mainly under 11. If it wants to claim exemption under 11, it cannot opt for either. Similar consequences, as I explained for depreciation. What will happen is that the income will increase. But if the income increases, you can apply it to charitable purposes. You get the 15% exemption. You can apply it in next year, and you can accumulate it for 5 years. So all these mitigating factors or aspects would be available to a trust which enjoys income which is otherwise exempt under section 10. This is a procedural provision. If you want to exercise the option for deemed application of income, so income to be applied in next year is deemed application of income. If you can't apply 85%, and you may apply it in subsequent year, the law says now you have to exercise in the form and in a manner that will be prescribed. So there will be a prescribed form. There was no prescribed form till now. There will be a prescribed form to get such relief. And again, another procedural provision. As you are aware, a trust could accumulate its income for 5 years. It did not spend in the year of receipt, and it would spend that in 5 years and still qualify for the exemption. The rule provided that the form has to be filed before expiry of time for filing return of income. Court said the rule goes beyond the Act. Act does not provide for such time limit. So now there is an amendment in the Act itself that the form should be filed before the due date of filing of return. So you have to file the form before the due date for filing of return under 139(1). And there is another amendment similar. Not only the form has to be filed, but even the return of income has to be filed before the due date if you want to claim the benefit of secondary accumulation for 5 years. So both these conditions have to be satisfied. If you can't, then you will not get the benefit of accumulation. just take it for 1 minute. एक मिनट So in good old days, we had 2 exam papers on a single day. This is my second exam. Unlike the other exam where one would get at least 1 hour's break, here there is no break. But I must say, this is my choice. I had opted for both, and I must thank the branch for allowing me to speak on both. So the hottest act at present, probably, except for the Black Money Act, I would say. It is in news, we all know. The government is very serious about it. You will be surprised to know that almost 10,000 out of 40,000 registered trusts under FCRA, their registration has been cancelled by the government. So 1/4 of the trusts have lost their registration. So here once again, I would deal with some substantive provisions, when is it applicable, and also deal with the procedural aspects with some practical insights, the experience that I have gained in dealing with the Act. There are proposals to amend the rules. So I would deal with those proposals also. Although I have been told informally again that there may be some further changes to those proposed rules also. Maybe some other conference on some other day after the rules are enacted. But it's important for us to know what are the procedural changes also. So the Act originally came in 76, height of emergency. Over a period, government realized that it needed some modifications. So in the year 2010, a fresh act came, FCRA 2010. And how do you interpret FCRA? So unlike income tax, where there are, as I said, 5 judgments every week reported, I could find only 5 judgments in last 34 years of FCRA. So very little litigation. The government has come out with FAQs on FCRA, dealing with a number of aspects. One, by and large could rely on the FAQs. It's also a rule and form based act. So apart from the act itself, there are a number of rules and number of forms. So one has to know the rules, one has to understand the forms for complying with the law. And one more aspect is, this is dealt with by Home Ministry, unlike income tax, which is dealt with by the Finance Ministry. And the reason is, it's for national security, to avoid seditious activity, anti-national activities, etc. So naturally, Home Ministry has been given the charge. So, what is the meaning of charitable institution? So for FCRA, there is no separate definition. FCRA essentially applies to a person as defined, and person includes AOPs, companies, etc. So if we apply the definition of person, FCRA would apply to typically all charitable institutions, including companies, societies registered under the Societies Registration Act, and trusts. The importance is, FCRA, most of the violations and the consequences are on the recipient and not on the donor. So it's the obligation of the recipient to ensure that it complies with the law. And that's why for a charitable institution, it becomes important to comply with this act, because not only the penal consequences, even the prosecution, etc., could be on the trustees. So when is FCRA applicable? So two important things. It should receive a contribution, donation, etc., contribution from foreign source. And such contribution is covered by the definition of foreign contribution. So two things, there should be a foreign source as defined in the Act, and there should be a foreign contribution. So if one of the two is missing or is not satisfied, then the Act will not apply. So if you get donation not from a foreign source, then obviously that Act will not apply. And if you receive, what are the conditions? A charitable institution can receive such contribution only if it has a definite cultural, economic, educational, religious or social program. Unless it has this, it can't receive a foreign contribution. And the second is, it ought to have obtained from the government a certificate of registration or a prior permission. So two things to satisfy and to come under the purview of FCRA, foreign source, foreign contribution, and two conditions to receive such contribution with a specific program and with a registration or permission. The next is definition of foreign source. I don't know whether that handout is there or not, but the definition is there. Okay. So it has multiple source categories, 10 to be precise. 3 are important, and those I have reproduced here. Foreign company, a company under the Companies Act. So an Indian company also can be a foreign source if more than 50% of its share capital is held by foreign government, foreign citizens, foreign corporations, foreign companies, foreign trusts, all. And I'll deal with this. And the third is citizen of a foreign country. So any contribution by a citizen of foreign country is a foreign source. And if we take example of PIOs, many Indians have gone abroad, taken citizenship of US, UK, etc. All such PIOs, even if they give any contribution, it would constitute a foreign source. So for a charitable institution, FCRA would apply to a contribution by a PIO. The next is, so an Indian subsidiary of a foreign company, as I mentioned, it need not, even if it's an Indian company, if more than 50% of its share capital is held by a foreign company, then it becomes a foreign source. So a 100% subsidiary of Microsoft, Google, General Motors, all these are foreign source, and the practical significance is any donation by them to any charitable institution is actually a foreign contribution covered by FCRA. The next is foreign subsidiary of an Indian company. So the other way round. Indian company is not covered. Tata still is not covered because it's an Indian company. But Tata Steel's Chorus, being a foreign subsidiary, would be covered, although it's 100% subsidiary. Hindalco is not covered, but Novelis would be covered. Indian Hotels may not be covered, but its Singapore subsidiary would be covered. Indian listed company. So there are some banks, there are some institutions where FII holding is more than 50%. Purely from a reading perspective, even these companies are covered because FCRA does not observe any distinction between a listed company and an unlisted company. As long as there is more than 50% shareholding, foreign shareholding, then it becomes a foreign source. So the same consequence, any donation by such listed companies is also a foreign contribution. And the last is NRI. I would divide this into two portions, in the sense, in principle and in practice. What happens when an NRI gives a donation? Is it a foreign source or not? In principle, it is not a foreign source because it's not a foreign citizen. Having mentioned citizen, foreign citizen specifically, I would feel it's not a foreign source. There is one FAQ Ministry has come out with, where again it is unqualified stated that from non-residents if you receive donation, it is not, PIOs are covered, non-resident Indians who continue to hold their citizenship abroad, they are still Indian citizens. That's the distinction between PIO and NRI. Those are not covered. So in principle, NRIs are not covered. But in practice, there is another FAQ which says that donations from NRI are exempt only if two conditions are satisfied. One, it should be out of his savings, and B, it should be remitted through normal banking channels. So both these conditions have to be satisfied. Then only a donation or a contribution will be exempt from the purview of FCRA. So practically any charitable institution proposing or getting such donation will obviously have to get a proof of citizenship, will obviously have to get a declaration that it is out of savings and not out of borrowings or some other, mainly borrowings, and it should receive through normal banking channels. Then it is not covered by FCRA. The next is foreign contribution. So there are three categories for foreign contribution. The one is the primary contribution, as I call it. There is a delivery, transfer or donation. Such delivery is made by a foreign source. Delivery is of an article, Indian currency, foreign currency, security, etc. And there is a small exclusion for gift given to a personal for personal use if such market value does not exceed the prescribed sum, and that is 25,000 at this stage. So there is a delivery, transfer or donation made by a foreign source, and it should be of any article, Indian currency, foreign currency, etc. Security defined in SCRA. This is one category. The second category is indirect contribution. Any contribution received from any person who has received it from any foreign source, either directly or through one or more persons, is also a foreign contribution. So if a foreign source gives money to A to be handed over to B, then for B also this is a foreign contribution as indirect contribution. And the third category is secondary contribution. So interest accrued on foreign contribution or any other income derived, these all become foreign contribution. And the purpose is the government wants to regulate utilization of such income also, not only the original donation. So one thing over here, one is, apart from that article, as I mentioned, for 25,000 gift, there is no de minimis. So even if there is a 100 rupee donation from a foreign source to a charitable institution, it is still a foreign contribution. And we take these 5 situations. So cash in Indian rupee by a PIO. Suppose the PIO is resident in India. He gives cash to a charitable institution, Indian rupee. Does it become foreign contribution? And the answer is yes. Because A, the definition of contribution covers Indian currency also. And there is an FAQ, FAQ 14, under which government is clarified that even in Indian rupees, if you get donation, it is covered. So if you practically see what is the consequence, if there is any temple and the PIO, say Nathdwara, and the PIO goes there, gives 500 rupees as contribution to the temple, gets a receipt for that, literally it's a foreign contribution. It's another thing that the trust does not know about it. But the fact is that it is a foreign contribution. Let's take the Rath Yatra. And if a PIO gives contribution on that day to the Rath Yatra, it becomes a foreign contribution. In Indian rupees or foreign currency, doesn't matter. Donation of old clothes, medicines, etc. So you have Nepal now, Banaskantha, flood relief, etc. And a doctor, PIO abroad, philanthropic in nature, gives some medicines as gift, old clothes. They are all foreign contribution because the definition of foreign contribution includes donation of any article, and article is wide enough to cover all such clothes, old, new, medicines, etc. And they all have to be accounted for by a charitable institution, and before accounting, it ought to have registration under FCRA or a prior permission. Pro bono services by a foreigner. So, if foreigner doesn't want to charge, is it covered? In my view, it is not covered. But probably the government has taken a stricter view. In a particular case, and which is reported, is there on the site of the government, the foreign trust gave an executive on secondment to the Indian trust, and it bore the remuneration of the foreign trust, of the secondee. The Indian trust did not have to bear any cost. Government felt it was a violation of FCRA, and it was one of the conditions and one of the circumstances for suspension of the license. Receipt of contribution by A trust for B trust. So as I mentioned, secondary contributions are also covered. So if A trust, with a clear understanding, it receives money for B trust, then for B trust, this becomes a foreign contribution. Although it is received from an Indian trust, it is not a foreign source by itself, but still there. The last is on CSR under 135. Why this is practically important? All companies with specified turnover, net profit, etc., even if they are Indian companies, are within the purview of section 135. They have to contribute 2% of your average net profits to CSR. So it would cover a subsidiary of Microsoft, Google, GM, all those companies also without exception. Question is whether that contribution through a trust, if a project is carried out through a trust, is it covered by the definition? And although I have my reservations, and it would depend on the facts, the way it has been structured, how it is, but what I have been told is that companies don't take a chance with this, the charitable institutions don't take a chance, and practically the government is getting lot of references for approval for CSR contributions also under 135. They are considering some relaxation. Again, these are all oral clarifications for CSR particularly in some manner. Now we go to the procedural aspects. There are conditions for registration, there are various conditions. One important, as I have highlighted, it should have a satisfactory track record of at least 3 years normally. So unless that track record is there, a charitable institution cannot avail of registration. All these are there in the either in the FAQ or in the section. All these conditions are there. It should have spent at least 10 lakhs over last 3 years, excluding administrative expenditure, and it should not have any office bearer who is a foreign national. Relaxation is given on a case-to-case basis, but very rarely I would feel that if you have a foreign national, that you will get a registration. What is the time limit for grant of registration? 90 days. The Act provides that within 90 days, the central government has to give you registration, but it can be extended after communication. So government can take more time, but it has to tell you about it. And now the procedure existing and proposed, both have same form. Hard copy of application is will no longer be required to be filed, and there will be a facility of digital signature, and online payment also. This is a very, so what has happened is the form is proposed to be revised and huge amount of information is now being sought before giving registration. So one is you have to give details of chief patron. What is patron is not defined. Patron as a dictionary meaning says someone who helps by his means or influence to a cause. So it could be a financial patronization or non-financial. You have to identify who are your patrons in plural. So if you have more than one patron, you have to give details of both patrons or more than all the patrons. But they have to be chief. So main patrons, they have to be current chief patrons. So if someone has patronized your trust in the past but is no longer patronizing it, then his details are not required. You have to identify your current chief patrons. And all his details have to be given. Not only that, details of all other institutions where such patron, functionary, etc. are on governing council. So you have, say, Mr. Deepak Parekh as your chief patron, HDFC. Then all the trusts with which Mr. Deepak Parekh is associated and on the governing council, you have to submit details of all those trusts also. The last one again I would, utilization of proposed foreign contribution. So suppose before registration you have got a commitment from some foreign source that yes, we would want to give you this donation, and then you realize that I can't accept because we can't accept because we don't have registration. If you apply at that stage, then you have to give all details of the donor, and if individual is one thing, but I'll read out what is required for a foreign organization, because typically from US the donations are routed through an organization. Name, head office, branch office, aim and objects of the organization. For each chief patron, each member of the governing council of that particular organization in US, you have to give his name, father's name, spouse's name, nationality, date, passport number, occupation, contact details, email address, landline number, mobile number, all these details. So if for some reason you have a commitment from someone before registration, then all these details will be required. We now go to the second one, the prior permission. So that if you are not able to obtain registration, say you are in a formative stage, not completed 3 years, then you can go for a specific prior permission, specific amount, specific donor for specific object and activities. So it's like a one time. Similar conditions, except 3 years track record, spending 10 lakhs, etc. The FAQ said that if you can get a district magistrate's recommendation letter, it is advisable if your permission is for less than 50 lakhs. More than 50 lakhs, it will not matter. So it's only less than 50 lakhs. So there was a format of certificate also, the certificate in which this district magistrate had to give his certificate, the format. That has been deleted in the new form. It was given in the old form. So I don't know what will finally happen, whether you need such type of certificate or not. Procedure, similar. I've given existing as well as proposed. The highlighted one, details of foreign donors. So this is similar to what is there for registration. You need their aims, objects, full particulars of its governing council, email addresses, registered office, everything you need. So the third is on renewal. the certificate was not perpetual, the earlier certificate. So if you got registration under 2010, then it is 5 years. And if it was under 1976, then it was 5 years from a notional deemed date of 1st May 2011. So it was up to 30th April 2016. And so in both cases, you will have to apply for renewal once the certificate's validity is over. So time frame for submission, again government classified them into two, those implementing ongoing project and those implementing other projects. Depending on it should be either 12 months before expiry or 6 months before expiry. Again, ostensibly, government has agreed to give registration in 90 days. Sorry. Sorry. Okay. So renewal is automatic unless the institution has violated any provision of FCRA. Again, comparison between existing and proposed. What details are required? Some of the details are common, but those details of chief patron, etc. are again required over here also. We now go to what happens after registration. And I've classified them into 4 different groups. Actions which are mandatory, actions which require prior permission of central government, actions which require post facto approval of central government, and actions which require only intimation to central government. And there are 8 which are mandatory. So you ought to, and I'll take you through this, but these are the 8 actions which are mandatory. You have to have a designated account. All your foreign contributions have to go into that account, and that's only a single bank account. An institution cannot have more than one account, and no other funds can be deposited in this account. Only plus contributions plus all interest, all income, because secondary contribution is also foreign contribution, and refund by donee of any unspent amount. So that is there in a form of a bank also, that they will allow this to go to the foreign contribution bank account. Then utilization. Utilization only for the purposes for which the contribution has been received. This is very critical. Government views it very seriously. And both these cases which are there on the site, they have viewed. So in one case, they had economic as their object and they used it for social purposes. And the government said, no, this cannot be permitted. The institution has to be engaged in reasonable activity. So you can't sit on the foreign contribution. After you get it, you have to use it, you have to utilize it. And if you don't for 2 consecutive years, then you could lose your certification. Utilization account, again, no funds other than foreign contribution can be transferred. And now, all this utilization will have to be given in the new form FC3. How can you, what do you do with the money? You cannot invest it in any speculative business. What is speculation is defined. Important is investment in mutual funds is also defined as speculative. There is no distinction between a liquid fund, debt fund, equity-oriented fund. So on the plain language, all mutual funds, all investments are banned under FCRA. Can you utilize it for administrative expenses? And the answer is no, not more than 50%. And this again has been a cause for suspension of some of these high profile trusts. If you want to spend more than 50% on administration, you have to go to the government and seek its prior approval. And what is administration? There is an elaborate list. Rule 5 is there in the handout also. A big list of expenses is there, which what is covered by administrative expenses. Fortunately, expenses in furtherance in objectives of the organization are obviously not administration expenses. And all these details have to be given. You have to maintain a register. The 7th point concerns us as chartered accountants. They have to be audited by a chartered accountant, and they require a form. There is a format. It's a format in Form FC6. The form also now proposes that it should, the chartered accountant should certify interest accrued as well as other income, etc. But it is not. At least I noticed it, it does not require you to certify the truth and fairness of combined accounts as such, There has to be a placement on website. So all these audited accounts, etc. have to be placed on the declared website of the charitable institution. Whether combined or FCRA related, it's not clear, but they have to be put on the website. The second one is more important. All foreign contributions received are proposed under the proposed rule to be put on the website within 7 days of receipt. So irrespective of the quantum of amount, 7 days, 50, 100 rupees, 500 rupees, 1000 rupees, it will have to be put on the declared website. So if you have your website, fine. If you don't have your website, then government prescribed website will have to be used to put your details. Annual return has to be filed and mandatory. Now, administrative expenses will have to be disclosed. So all you'll have to maintain accounting in a proper manner, classify the expenses in administration, non-administration, and those will have to be disclosed. So then, actions which require prior permission. The first one is transfer of funds to another institution. Essentially, it requires an application in Form FC10. I will not get into the details, we don't have much time. And they both, whether you have obtained registration or whether you not obtained, the recipient has obtained or not obtained, in both cases, prior permission has to be taken. In the second case, if the amount to be transferred is only if less than 10%. Sorry, more than. Then, now it is proposed in Form FC7. The language is slightly vague of the new form. We have sought clarifications and hopefully they will be clarified. Change of trustees. So if you started with 3 trustees, A, B and C, if A retires, you don't need prior permission. But if A and B, which constitute more than 50% of the trustees, and if there is a change, then you have to go to the government. So the idea is that the registration was granted on the basis of the persons behind the organization, and if those persons behind the organization are no longer there, then the government would like to have a fresh look at the registration. Utilization of more than 50%, as I mentioned, you can't use it for administration expenses. Change of purpose. Again, if you have got permission for A project or A purpose, you can't utilize it for B purpose. But in our case, what we have been told is that if you have originally taken money for corpus and now you want to utilize it on object, same object, then you don't need the permission. Post facto approval, the third category, change in name, change in registration, change in nature, change in aim and objects, all these are now proposed for registration. Within 30 days, you have to make an application. Practical difficulties will arise. So let's say if a Section 8 company has to obtain approval for its change in name from the government or aim and object, so it will have to obtain approval from Ministry of Company Affairs, and it will have to obtain approval from Home Ministry also. What requires intimation is change of members causing less than 50% of the members. So as I mentioned, A, B and C, if A alone retires, you have to just give an intimation. Change in address, just give an intimation. But it has been taken seriously in a particular case. Opening of any utilization account, you merely intimate the government. So this is what Gandhiji said in 1942, and probably it is still appropriate. In the end, whether it amounts to a new country's influence or it's a new rule added to the British rule. That time it was British. So that brings me to the end of both my exams.
This is with respect to first part of your presentation. Whether donation given to this Nepal flooding by any Indian trust would be affecting the registration of the trust?
No. So what is government? This is not coming out of the amendment, but you have to apply to such purposes in India. If application is for Nepal, there is a separate subsection 11(1)(c), and government has come out with the protocol and procedure for a charitable institution to apply and get an approval to spend money in Nepal. Beg your pardon? No, I would feel it is prior. You should get approval, and see, this is what they have said. The first time they said that they will give an approval within 48 hours. I don't know practically whether they have been doing it after that or not.
In such calamities, people don't wait for that approval.
No. So, I'm saying that's a procedural thing. Government will obviously take into consideration if you make a representation. The law is this, that if you want to apply to such purposes outside India, you need government's approval.
As an auditor, if that approval is not sought, then are you required to make any note in your audit report?
No, so what will happen is you will not get that as a, this is, again I mind well, this is not coming out of the amendment, but I'm clarifying. This, it will not be regarded as application in India. If it is not regarded as application for such purposes in India, you will not get a deduction for that. That is what will happen, and the balance, then you will have to decide whether to make a provision for taxation or not.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah.
I want to ask two questions. One is, as you told that if a charitable institute selling handicraft article to foreign funding agency and receive sell consideration, is it compulsory to receive in a FC designated account?
Okay, good. I thought, anyway, there is an exception to the definition of foreign contribution where any business transaction like this, sale purchase, so consideration for rendering services, consideration in the ordinary course of business, that is an exception. That it does not constitute foreign contribution. The technical issue there comes is, and I thought it would not be very relevant, it accepts only transactions in the ordinary course of business. Now, as I just explained for this, I consider that not in the ordinary course of business, it is pursuant to its objectives. I would feel, even if it is pursuant to its objectives and not in the ordinary course of business, although that explanation 4 or whatever it is will not apply, it will still not constitute foreign contribution because it is not a donation. Whether you get it in the course of your business or in carrying out your objective, in either case.
Sir, my second question is regarding this renewal of FCRA. It is given in the act that the government should reply in 90 days, whether it is a query or it is a renewal. So I think everybody has mentioned by you that 12 months before the expiration has to apply, and everybody I think has applied in the month of April, before 30th April. So when we will get the renewal, or if you can give some insight, informal if you do.
No, I think there's really
because 90 days is already passed and so nobody has received any query in fact.
They are, whatever I know, they are really stuck up in the existing matters of some high profile trust, and so they are working on that. I think renewal, what would happen is practically, if you have violated any provision of the act, then they will not grant, so in the 5 years track record. If you have not violated, then ordinarily they will grant. That is the language of the provision also. That was Home Minister's commitment in 2010 also. You should follow up, because what is the alternative? You file a writ. And what is the guarantee that the writ court will compel, it will ultimately tell them, okay, you do it in 30 days or 60 days or so. So I don't think there is any point in really, fighting with the government on that. You can follow up and ask them.
And once this amendment passed, as you mentioned, then everybody has to then file a renewal online with a new form.
Yes, I think they have blocked the old forms.
Okay.
They are no longer accepting them.
Thank you so much.
Regarding that investment register, you have told that no further investment has been banned. You have told that further investment has been banned. So we have to take the registration as per foreign contribution. You have mentioned in delivery 4. What the effect of the bonus share received on that security? Whether it is permissible?
Once you have obtained...
So it is to be considered as from that source. So it is to be considered as foreign contribution.
It will be additional foreign contribution. You will have to put it in your investment register and you should report it that is an augmentation. See, in the form, not only the 100 original shares, but even bonus shares will have to come there. But any such receipt will affect you in section 13 of Income Tax Act. So you may get immunity under FCRA, but under Income Tax Act, if you want to continue your exemption, then you cannot hold these shares for more than 1 year after the year of receipt. So just...
Sir, there is a company which is registered under the 1956 Act and not registered under Section 25. It's a regular company. And they have made one website campaign for getting a contributions from the foreign entities for their research work. They are doing a research work for the cancer and other disease. And they got collected some of the amounts of around 8 lakh, 10 lakhs rupees only. And they close it, and then that account is closed, and then subsequently donation has been remitted to India from that website. So whether that FCRA is applicable, quantum is only 8 lakhs. Any other case, the quantum is more than 80, 90 lakhs rupees. 2 different campaigns they have run. Company is in an ordinary course of the business. Initially they are doing a R&D at this moment, but going to be a business entity in future.
Okay. So One, as I mentioned, there is no minimum exemption. Irrespective of the amount, foreign contribution is a foreign contribution. So whether it's 8 lakhs or 80 lakhs, if it is a foreign contribution, it will be covered under FCRA. The second thing is, the Act applies to a person, and person does not distinguish between a private limited company or a Section 25 company or a Section 8 company. As long as it is a donation type of receipt, and then it would definitely be covered. And I think there is one clarification that if even any individual HUF, anyone who receives it for charitable purpose will be covered by FCRA. So normal individual is not covered. But so anything to do with charitable purposes like this will be covered. And I would feel even a normal private limited company, if it receives contributions and donations in this manner, then it ought to be covered.
We can have the last question now. Yes.
Any time limit after the receipt of the foreign contribution for utilization?
No, there is no statutory time limit. As I mentioned, there is one section, Section 14, which says that you have to have reasonable activity within 2 years. So if you get the money, you keep it with you, you don't utilize for years together, government can ask you why you haven't done. And if you are not able to give a satisfactory reason, it can actually cancel your registration. I think they can impound the money and take possession of that money also. So I would advise that you should utilize it for the purpose for which, and not immediately, but over a period.
Sir, we can take these other questions informally in the.
So I'll now request Subodhji to please propose a vote of thanks.
Today's learned faculty, C.A. Rajesh Kadakia ji, past chairman of Ahmedabad branch, Jayesh Vaisha, coordinator Pradeep Tulshad. Whether charitable are really for charity or otherwise is a question the government always tries to find, and hence the amendment year by year. Rajesh Bhai has very excellently dealt with such recent amendments. The related topic is NGO who gets foreign aid or the aid from the foreign sources. It is very important because India is facing a cultural and otherwise terrorism, and such all activities are being funded by these foreign sources. Even the saying of Mahatma Gandhi that in end it amounts to X influence or X rule who is supporting such activities. We all are fortunate that Rajesh Bhai Kadakia has taken both the subject in very effective and lucid manner. I propose a very hearty vote of thanks to him on behalf of members of Ahmedabad branch. Thank you very much, and let us join for the lunch. We would have a break of say 30 minutes or 40 minutes for the same. Thank you. Please take it in.